And then I'm gonna let folks in. Let's see. Hello, 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 everyone. Thank y'all so much for joining. Thank y'all. I'm just waiting for more folks to pop in. Thank y'all for being here. I don't know if it's too late to say Happy New Year, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Happy New Year. Thank y'all so much for being here I'm just so happy that Dr. Suad said yes to this, her teaching or to this teaching. So I'm so looking forward to it. And I know y'all are as well. So yes, thank y'all for joining. We're gonna wait a few more moments so folks can just pop in and really get all this wisdom and just amazing scholarship from Dr. Suad. Feel free to use the chat. We like to shout out folks to where are you all based? What brings you here to this chat or to this teaching? And please feel free to share your name, your pronouns, and where you're based. And so super excited that y'all are here. Hi, Tennille, how are you doing? Thank you for being here. Okay, we're gonna wait a few more moments, folks. Like I said, please feel free to use the chat and share your name, where you're based. And also during the teaching, just make sure you can also use the chat as well. If something resonates with you, just feel free to share it in the chat, y'all. We're gonna get started in another moment. Hi, Leela from Baltimore, Maryland. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for being here. Hi, Toivo. Hey, Mars. Mars from Philly, how you doing? Okay, got folks from Chicago, Atlanta, Georgia. Oh, Oakland. Oh, got folks from the UK. Hey, y'all. Hey, Devin, based in San Diego. Oh, Newark. I saw Los Angeles. Hey, Ugo, based in DC. Listen, Dr. Suad, I told you. The people, they're ready for you. Hi, Benta from Minnesota. Hello, Brooklyn. Okay. Naima, thank you for being here. We are ready. Yes, y'all are ready. Miriam, Boston, New York, Toronto. Wow. Just going to give folks a few more moments to pop on. Thank y'all so much for being here. And I'm going to get started so we can get this goodness from Dr. Suad. Oh, wow. Thank you for being here from Havana, Cuba. Wow. Wow, thank you all so much for being here. This is so great. Yes, Dr. Suad is brilliant. I agree, very much so. All right, y'all, we're going to get started because I want to honor our amazing guest and her time. So my name is, oh, I'm sorry, one more thing before I get started. We have someone here from Shanghai, Dr. Suad. So this is amazing. Thank y'all for being here, Ivory Coast. So my name is Jamie Swift. I use she, her pronouns. I am the executive director of Black Women Radicals and the School for Black Feminist Politics. And if you're not familiar with BWR and the School for Black Feminist Politics, Black Women Radicals is a Black feminist advocacy organization, and we are dedicated to uplifting Black feminist leaders, organizers, educators, and just Black feminisms generally around the world. The School for Black Feminist Politics is the political education hub established in 2020 of BWR, which has a mission of expanding the frame of reference of Black feminisms through the power of Black politics through the power of Black feminisms, right? So thank y'all so much for being here. And Dr. Suad's teaching is the first teaching for the school of this year. I want to establish really quickly some ground rules before we get started. This is a safe space, okay? So no anti-Blackness, no racism, no Islamophobia, transphobia, white supremacy, et cetera, is not allowed in this space. And if you do not abide by those rules, you would be kicked out. And so please honor our guests and honor this space. And so, like I said, we have the chat, so feel free to engage the chat. And if something resonates with you, just share it, you can share it. And also this teaching will be available on Black Women Radicals YouTube. So please, reference that as well. So without further ado, I'm going to properly introduce Dr. Suad Abdul Khabeer, who is a scholar, artist, activist originally from Brooklyn, New York. She is curator of Umi's Archive, a multimedia project documenting Black and Muslim histories, and co-founder of Sapelo Square, a digital media and education collective on Black Muslims in the United States. Trained as an anthropologist, Suad's first book, Muslim Cool: Race, Religion, and Hip Hop in the United States, is a field-defining study on Islam and hip hop that examines how intersecting ideas of Muslimness and Blackness challenge and reproduce the meanings of race in the United States. Suad's written scholarly work is accompanied by her performance-based work, including her one-woman solo show, Sampled: Beats of Muslim Life. She has written broadly for outlets including The Root, The Washington Post, Vice, and Ebony Magazine, and has appeared on Al Jazeera English. Suad is an associate professor of American culture and Arab and Muslim American studies at the University of Michigan. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to you, Dr. Suad.
Thank you. Thank you, Jamie and everyone at Black Women Radicals for this invitation. I'm really excited to be here and to share about activist sisters, Black women and Black revolution in the US. Thank you to everybody from around the world who is here tonight, which is really dope. I really appreciate that. Let me share my screen. Okay, I think, all right, we're good, yeah. So I begin today in the name of Allah, for the love of Muhammad, to honor the ancestors in celebration of my people. I also begin in acknowledgement that the land upon which I am, right here in what is called the United States, is the unceded and ancestral territory of the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island. And some of us are uninvited guests, but we don't have to be. I also begin an acknowledgement of the histories of colonialism, imperialism, slavery, displacement, and the efforts against those evils that everyone around the world has been affected by, that every day is Ashura and every land is Karbala. So I am Saad Abdul Khabeer, blessed to be the daughter of Amina Amatul Haq, who was the daughter of Carmen Innes Weeks and granddaughter of Myra Riley Innes and Ella Beatrice Barzy Weeks, who are the descendants of other mothers and daughters whose names, tongues, and country marks were stolen by transatlantic slavery, but whose prayers fortify us till this day. And I mention these women so that you know where I come from and who I belong to, but also how I come to this work and this topic that I'm talking about today. So my mother, Amina Amatul Haq, she died suddenly in October of 2017. She had two girls, myself and my sister, and I'm the oldest. And so when she passed away, I was responsible for sort of the death cleaning. And I had always known that my mother lived a remarkable life, although she wasn't one to brag, but she was really transparent about her life. And so as I'm going through her things and her papers, I'm finding all these just sort of documents and artifacts that I find really compelling and powerful, both in terms of what her life was, but also the idea that her life was remarkable, but not singular, right? And so her life and her life history and her story and activity is connected, right, to other women. And so to these other women that I'll be talking about tonight, some of whom I knew really well, like Sister Ali Abdul Karim and Sister Karima Abdul Karim, some who I knew from a little bit of a distance, like Sister Damira Ahmed, and some who I didn't know. I'm learning about them through their writings and their work, like Sister Safiya Bukhari, although I know all these women, their paths had crossed. And so, and I wanted to mention one other thing, the reason why I'm using the term sister. So in Black Muslim communities in the United States, we use the term sister and brother as sort of an honorific, particularly as both an identification of the fact that, the kind of ways in which sister and brother as ways of terms of endearment and address in Black communities in the United States became popular, particularly during the Black Power movement, and also in recognition of the belief in Muslim tradition that people who are Muslims are like siblings with each other. And so sister is a term that I would use growing up to refer to an adult. So in English, people might say Mr. or Miss or whatever, but I grew up saying sister. So I'm going to be referring to them as sister first name in honor of that tradition, in honor of the way that I had and would have interacted with them. Yes. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit before I get into it, just about where I'm getting my information from. So my sources that I'm using today are coming from the personal and family archives of my mother that I call Umi's Archive. As was mentioned in the introduction, Umi's Archive is this kind of multimedia interdisciplinary project that I'm engaged in now, that is building on or drawing on the materials of one woman and one woman's family, my mother, Amina Matul Haq. You know, an everyday person who lived a remarkable life. Because of all the different things that she's connected to, I find her archive really rich as a way to think about different aspects of the Black experience, whether it's diaspora and immigration, racism, particularly in the north of the US, questions of class, gender, sexuality, religion, and spirituality are all really vibrant in this archive. And it's a generative space. The project started as a 6-part online exhibition that I did in 2021, where I was the curator. About 800 items were exhibited over the 6 exhibitions, and these items are both sort of extraordinary and ordinary. And so if you look at the screen here, you see, right, like there's a button from the Million Women's March back in '97. You know, there's a photo from her father when he served in World War II. He was a Black soldier in World War II when they were coming back from the war in 1945. A tape of the activist Zainab El-Ghazali from Egypt, who gave a talk in 1976. So it's a cassette tape of that. There's also a photo of my grandmother as a little girl and her brother and her father in Harlem. So this is in like the 30s. There's an image of my mother when she made Hajj, when she became Hajja Amina, an image of her early in 65, I guess at a cotillion, right? And also this kind of postage size stamp sticker about freeing Mumia Abu Jamal, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. One of the things about Umi's Archive I think is important to mention, you know, in the process of pulling together this work and learning more about my mother after she passed, I kind of did some research and I encountered her college partner and comrade, a man named Jefferson Gwynn. And he has been really wonderful with the information he shared with me. But on reflecting on Umi's Archive, he said to me that it has the eye of a scholar, the passion of an activist, and the heart of a child. And it's one of the most powerful things someone has said to me thus far about this project, but I mention it because I want you to understand how I come to this work, what I bring to this work, and what the work means to me, and what I hope the work inspires in others, which is why I called Umi's Archive a reclaimed space where we remember and dream. Other sources that I've used, I'm drawing on today, are oral histories. So one of the sisters I mentioned, Sister Kareem Abdul Kareem, who I'll talk about later, is in the photo here with me here. I talked to her several times. Also, there was a tribute to Sister Damir Ahmed on KPFA California, the show Africa Today, drawing on that, of course, drawing on Safiya Bukhari's, the collection of her writings, The War Before, as well as this really fantastic article on Sister Damira, that was in this new text, Black Power Afterlives, and other things that I found online to just give you a sense. And I'm telling you this because for 2 reasons. One is I want to be clear that I kind of come to this work not as so much as an expert, but as a student, right, of these women's stories and their lives. And I want you to understand that. And also, I want to just mention some of the limitations, I guess, of what I'll be saying today in terms of the women that I'm focusing on three primary women sort of come, or they would be described as sort of Sunni Muslims. And so what that means is that while as activist sisters, you find Black Muslim women as activist sisters who are in the Nation of Islam, who are Ahmadi, who are Shiite, right? And different sort of segments of the Black Muslim community. My focus is on these women, and sort of just want to kind of point that out there. Yeah, okay, so one last preliminary thing. So this is sort of the presentation threads, I'm calling it, because I'm not exactly going in a chronological order in this way, as you see on the screen, but I did want to kind of give you a sense of what I'm going to try to talk about today. And I'm saying threads because really the way that I'm narrating or talking about activist sisters is like with a thread, right? It is sort of thinking about them all together and in relationship to each other, as opposed to sort of 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'll be kind of offering a definition of activist sister, speaking some on their life histories or biographies, speaking to what connects them, then sort of closing on some legacies and lessons, and then opening up for Q&A. All right, let's get it. All right. So part of why so like I said, there are three main women, activist sisters, let me use the term that I'm going to be talking about today: Amina Matul Haq, Damira Khalada Ahmed, and Safia Bukhari. And part of the reason why I'm talking about these three women together is because of the many as I began to sort of learn more about Sister Damira and Sister Safia, I began to see all these ways in which these women had similarities or things that connected them to each other, a lot of through lines or threads, right? Connected them to each other, connected them to history, and connected them to the Black radical tradition. Everything from membership in the Black Panther Party to motherhood, right? And so that's a lot. So what I decided to do was focus on three kind of themes, or three threads or through lines that I saw connecting them to each other. Sort of Islam, education for liberation, and prison and political prisoners. But before I do that, I do want to mention something that I also noticed, right? And I'll mention this also when as I kind of talk about them. You know, they were all born in 1950, right? Which speaks to the way that they are a part of a generation, right? A generation that came of age. They all turned 18 in 68. In fact, the Reverend Martin Luther King was assassinated on my mother's 18th birthday, right? So they all came of age in 68 at a time in the world, right, where decolonization is happening, the war in Vietnam is happening, the civil rights, Black power movement, all these things are happening, right? So they come of age and they come to political maturity, right? And a particularly powerfully poignant political time. And they also, and Sister Damira and my mother die in the same year. Safia Bukhari dies much earlier than them, but they all sort of return to their maker sort of earlier than, you know, sort of life expectancies, right? Even for Black women. And so I think, and I mentioned that because I think, and I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but I was just thinking about in terms of their passing on, right, in terms of what that might speak to us in terms of thinking about also the toll of what it means to be an activist sister, the toll of what it means to struggle, right? I mean, they lived full lives, they lived rich lives, right? But I think we all would have wanted them here with us a little bit longer. So this is something to think on. So the next thing I want to do is kind of define activist sisters. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play for you a little clip. I had happened to do one oral history interview with my mother in around 2012 or 2013. And that's where in this clip, or in the interview, which was like a 45-minute interview, is where she says the term activist sister. So I want to play that for you. Oh, wait. Sorry, I'm gonna stop my share because I know I forgot to click audio. So let me click audio. Share sound. Hold on, let me try again. Oh, actually, Jamie, it's not letting me click the share sound button.
Let me see. Let me see 1 second, y'all. It should let you share. Is it popped up on your screen? Like,
So when I click share screen, you know how you get the box and then at the bottom it says optimize for video clip, share sound, but they're grayed out.
wow, I don't know why they did that. 1 second, y'all. Let me see.
Okay.
It should let you do that. And if not, what I'll do is so I just made you a co-host. So I
Okay.
don't know if that changes anything.
Let me see. Let's see. It does not.
Oh Lord.
Should we try and see if you hear anything?
Sure, yes.
Let's do that. Let's try and see if you hear anything. And let's see.
I've always been a gregarious, open type.
Do you hear anything?
And
I want
basically,
to ask the audience hears, yes. Okay, perfect. Yes. Thank y'all.
They hear?
Yes, they can hear it.
Okay, all right, cool. All right, let me go back to it then.
I've always been a gregarious, open type person. And basically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through his mercy, sort of put me through to some activist sisters. And one of the activist sisters, my late friend Abdul Khabeer, I met coming out of the department store with the little girls with the little short kimonos on. She had a gay on. I remember asking one up there and saying, "Sister, are you Muslim?" She said, "Yes." And I said, "I'm a Muslim. I just took my shahada 2 weeks ago." Immediately, she gave me a number. She told me about a Muslim Women's Function at Columbia University with Sharifa Al-Khatib. I met Abdul Khabeer. I even met a girl that I knew from the movement, Aida Muhammad, who was raised in Islam, but she was always on the cultural sets. And she was up there, and I said, "So I Muslim, okay, Muhammad, last name, you know." And a lot of those people that I befriended at Columbia University are still my friends to this day. I was part of a trend. Some of my friends came into Islam late 60s. A lot of my friends came into Islam early 70s. I came into Islam mid. There was a big crew of us after Elijah Muhammad died in 1975 that had accepted Islam. So all through the 70s, there were mass conversions. So I think there's a lot of us that felt we was all in the same boat.
So in this clip, there are two things I want to sort of just kind of talk about to give us some context. And I'll start with the last thing she said about this trend, right? So, you know, what she's talking about is the ways in which Islam and the practice of Islam reemerges in Black communities in the later half of the 20th century. You know, we know that historically speaking, Black communities in the United States in the later half of the 20th century, but also throughout the Western Hemisphere. So we know that, you know, there were numbers of the Africans who were stolen from the continent and enslaved in the Americas. We know that they were Muslim. There are numbers of them that they range in the percentage, but we know they were in North America, they were in Central America, and they were in South America. We also know that slavery, by its nature, right, made it impossible for people to can practice their faith and their religion. And so we know that the practice of Islam, like the practice of Igbo traditions and other sort of like traditional African religions or African religions, also kind of falls off or is unable to be fully practiced. And so Islam, as a practice that Black people do in this hemisphere, sort of reemerges, right, really sort of in the sort of 20s and the 30s, but by the time the 60s and the 70s come, in great part due to the success of the Nation of Islam, due to the impact of Al-Hajj ibn al-Shabazz, Malcolm X. Also in this video, my mother talks about, you know, she first became attracted to Islam after she read the autobiography of Malcolm X when she was 17, right? So you have sort of Islam and Islam being attractive to Black people. Why? Being attractive to Black people who are looking to sort of reconnect, right, to an African past that predates and that's bigger than the white supremacist imagination for who Black people are, and looking for a spiritual tradition that embraces that connects them to that. And so Islam became really, really attractive to a number of people. And so this is the trend she's talking about. And so in that trend, right, and she converts to Islam, and she meets these activist sisters, as she calls them, and she mentions a few of them in the clip. So activist sisters describes a cohort of women who, like her, firmly believe Islam provides ethical, spiritual, and practical means to advance justice for themselves, for their families, and for their people. Activist sisters were organizers, mobilizers, educators, and community leaders. Activist sisters' activities demonstrate their belief as Muslims that women have the capacity and the responsibility to organize, mobilize, educate, and lead alongside other members of the community. Activist sisters lived as people who were Black and Muslim and women in ways that I think, and I want to mention this, are important to point out that both sort of challenge, contradict a non-Muslim obsession with the silent, oppressed Muslim woman, an obsession that actually was just beginning to kind of take off in the 1970s when they're all converting, as well as Muslim obsessions with the idea that the ideal Muslim woman is one who is passive and mute, as well as it challenged their lives being Black, Muslim, and women, challenged the status of Christianity as the Black religion, and claims that Islam is not a religion for African people or revolutionaries. Their spirituality as activist sisters is embodied. It is expressed through the earnest repetition of prayers they did, and the radical study they did, and the unceasing movement building they did. And while my mother, right, was discussing her specific context, right, being in New York City in the mid-1970s and these activist sisters, when we look at other women like Sister Damira Ahmed and Sister Sophia Bukhari, it is clear that the term can be used more broadly. So Sister Damira Ahmed is from the town. She was born in Oakland, California, as Carlotta Besso Simon, right? She was born about 3 months before my Umi and 3,000 miles away. Sister Damira came to Islam as a Black radical activist. She also converting to the religion in the mid-1970s. She joined the Nation of Islam because they were doing things in the Black community. In 1967, she joined the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, an organization founded in Oakland, California in 1966, whose 10-point political platform for Black people in the United States sought self-determination and solidarity with oppressed peoples around the world. She worked in the Oakland and San Francisco chapters. She described herself as a, quote, foot soldier, and that the work that the party did, all of the work the party did was, quote, taking care of people, unquote. So her work taking care of people included, quote, either working down at the office or going out selling papers or serving breakfast in the morning, working on food distribution, getting people to rallies, getting people to health clinics, unquote. She's also described as laying out articles, right, for the party's paper, and she stood on post as armed security for the party offices. Now, motherhood kind of moves her away from the party in 1971 when she has her first child, Nisa, but not away from her commitments to her comrades, not away from her commitments and her comrades. Sister Damira went on to continue to be a foot soldier, caring for people in the community as a Muslim. As I mentioned, she joined the Nation of Islam, where she was one of the first teachers at the Sister Clara Muhammad School in Oakland, and she had a leadership role in the MGT. She organized, later in life, she organized the Lighthouse Mosque community, also in Oakland, to serve meals to adults who are living at a hotel in downtown Oakland. And she really is described, and I knew her because like I said, I knew her because I knew her by face, and like I would see her around. And so she was one of those people, one of those elders in the community that was really, really active, right? People knew her, people respected her because she showed up, right? She showed up for people. And one of the things that has been said about her right, is that, and this particularly in the article by Mariam Kashani, right, that she brought her Black radical background with her in her life as a Muslim, particularly in the ways that she pushed Muslim communities to be accountable to the community rather than captivated by sort of charismatic leadership. She later became a teacher and then a principal in Oakland Public Schools, where she worked for 25 years. So this question of education for liberation. So as I mentioned, right, Sister Damira joins the Black Panther Party in 1967 when she's 17 years old. Like Sister Amina was 17, like Sister Sophia was 17, which means she's still a high school student, right? And in the biographies of all these women, education plays a really dominant role, but not as a means of upward mobility, but as a tool for liberation. And in particular, the university was like this site of politicization. Sister Zamira enters San Francisco State in 1968, and she joins the Black Student Union, which was pivotal to the Third World Strike that led to the establishment of Black Studies and Ethnic Studies, both at SF State, but also around the country. Now, Sister Damira didn't just organize for Black Studies, but she also helped to establish the curriculum of Black Studies at SF State, working directly with Dr. Nathan Hare, known as the father of Black Studies. Now, Sister Amina also had joined the BPP and was also involved in student protests at Ohio State University, and was also helped to establish Black Studies on campus. And similar to Sister Damira, my Umi's politicization also seemed to happen before she gets to college. I remember her telling me that my grandmother was afraid for her to go to the South for college because she was afraid that she would basically get killed because she was so outspoken. She ends up, you know, at Ohio State and is doing the things anyway. But there's all the two things I just wanted to share and that I found in the archive that I think illustrate this, which was funny. So one, in her high school yearbook is an autograph, right, where someone calls her, it's a really lovely note, but they call her the stone Black woman, right? On the flip side, there's another autograph by this white male student who is a member of the Oriental Club. Oriental is the 60s, right? So Oriental here basically means the Asian American Students Club, but this white guy who's a member of that club, right, writes her a note telling her that she could catch more bees with honey than vinegar, right? So a little white fragility in 1968. Sister Damira, like my Umi sister Amina, went on to work for the public school system, right? Which is really not a small thing. And it's funny because, you know, as someone who was raised by a public school teacher, you know, I joke about this. I decided to become a university professor because there was too much grading at the public school level. I remember having to help my mother grade, right? And I mean, and that's true, there's too much grading, but when I've been going back into the archive and looking at these women's lives, and their radicalness of the, you know, sort of their Black radical sort of politics and like sort of tracing that Black radical politic throughout their life, it's like no wonder they became public school teachers, right? Because again, education is a tool for liberation. Like you can't have a powerful and a strong nation if people aren't educated, right? And we know that they knew, right? And in the times they were coming from, all the information about who they were as a people, what they've done, you know, all that had been hidden, right? So it was really, really important to sort of bring that information, right, to the community. And beyond that, we also know that the schools our kids go to are the schools that are underfunded, right, that are under-resourced. So the decision, right, to sort of invest in public schools and public education is a really radical and revolutionary one. And for Sister Sophia, you know, she was not a public school teacher, but she was an educator, right? And she was an educator through her speaking and organizing around political prisoners. So Sister Sophia Bukhari was born Bernice Jones 2 days before my Umi and about 2 miles away in the Bronx, New York. She described growing up in a family that had middle-class aspirations, which really is true of both my mother's family and also Sister Damira's family. And so because they had middle-class aspirations, her family made her go to college. And she says, quote, "We believed with the right education, we could make it. So that is the route we took, searching for the quote unquote American dream. I was going to be a doctor. In my second year of college, I pledged a sorority. It was here that the rose-colored glasses were cracked and rays of reality were allowed to filter in, unquote. And so she narrates the story of her sorority deciding that they wanted to sort of do charitable work. And initially they were like, oh, we should, I don't send money to some children in Africa type of deal. And one of her comrades said, but Bernice at the time, Sister Sophia, was like, no, we should, look around, where we are. And so she's in New York City. And so they decided to go to Harlem. And at the time when they decided to go to Harlem and sort of do charitable work in Harlem, she described herself as being of the kind of mindset where she thought that, poor people were poor because it was their fault, right? Like they're not doing what they're supposed to do in order to get out of poverty. And as a result of going into Harlem to sort of work with the Black community there, she encounters the Black Panther Party because at the time they had their free breakfast program. And so she says, while she couldn't get into the party's politics, she could volunteer, right, to sort of feed kids. And so she's just volunteering until one day, she says she sees the police harassing a party member who's selling, he's selling the paper like on a street corner, and she goes to intervene to be like, he has and she says, like, I telling the police officer, he has a constitutional right to be here and sell this paper. Of course, she ends up being arrested, right? And humiliated, and that leads her to join the party and its politics. And she says, quote, I tell people straight up that it was the New York Police Department that made me decide to join the Black Panther Party. In college, I supported the war in Vietnam, which has me tripping that she said this about herself. But she says, in college, I supported the war in Vietnam. I was so far to the right, it was ridiculous. I was writing essays on, quote, why we should be in Vietnam, unquote. But by the time the summer of 1969 was over, in November, I was in the party. Right? So Sister Sophia is most well known, right, for her active participation in the Black Panther Party, as well as the Black Liberation Army, an underground movement of armed struggle for, quote, the liberation and self-determination of Black people in the United States, unquote, and the Republic of New Africa, a Black nationalist organization that was created in 1969 on the premise that an independent Black republic should be created out of parts of the Southern United States. Later, Sister Sophia would be unwavering in her commitment to freeing political prisoners in the United States, as she herself spent almost 9 years as a political prisoner after being falsely convicted in 1975. So when she was a member of the Black Panther Party, she worked on the free breakfast program. She was a student of political education, right? She describes her first year in the party as, quote, working with welfare mothers and liberation schools, talking to students, learning the reality of life in the ghettos of America, and reevaluating many of the things I had been taught about the, quote unquote, land of the free and home of the brave. She edited BPP materials, including co-founder Bobby Seale's book. She sold papers, she worked at the clinic, and she ended up being part of party leadership. She ran the Bronx BPP office with both encouragement and, quote, all the tenderness of a drill sergeant, unquote, as described by Mumia Abu-Jamal. And when the party had its split, she was the communication and information officer on the East Coast and in charge of national committees for the defense of party members imprisoned as political prisoners. In 1973, after being falsely accused of plotting to break prisoners out of jail in New York and then subpoenaed to testify against other Black radical activists, she went underground and joined the BLA. In 1975, while in Virginia as a unit leader of the Amistad Collective of the BLA, a shootout at a grocery store broke out and she was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 40 years. She managed to escape in 76, but was recaptured and served almost 4 years in solitary confinement. She was ultimately paroled in 1983 after spending close to 9 years as a still prisoner. Now, one of the thing about Sister Sophia, and you see this when she gets out of prison, right? And mind you, and I didn't mention this, she had a daughter that she was kept away from, right, for the 8 years that she was incarcerated. She comes out of prison and she immediately starts working for the cause of political prisoners. She helps to co-found the National Jericho movement, which exists to this day, right? Because we still have, last time I checked their website, they're about still, I think it was, if I counted correctly, still about 23 political prisoners in the United States, including Mumia Abu Jamal, who I mentioned, as well as Imam Jamil Al-Amin, who I'll talk about in a second. And she also founded the Free Mumia Abu Jamal, the New York Free Mumia Abu Jamal Coalition. And the thing about her, now, the thing about, oops, I skipped something. Hold on, y'all, 1 second. Yeah, well, I'll come to it. I'll come back to it. But so the thing about her work, and I remember I was saying the things that connect these sisters to each other. So, Sister Sophia, right, is in the party. She gets incarcerated. She suffers abuse, all types of, sort of like, the general kind of maltreatment that prisoners receive. And then additional maltreatment because of the political nature of her incarceration, right? She had really bad fibroids as they were unattended, in the war before, she kind of details what she went through. And then she comes out and then she dedicates her life to the cause of the political prisoners. One, which includes getting both the general public and the United States to recognize that we have political prisoners, which they still do not do. Making sure that we don't forget the people who are inside, and of course, working on their defense. So this is her work around prison and political prisons, or her experience. Umi, my mother, right, also, like when I go through her archive, and this is what I meant about Imam Jamil. So that postage size stamp sticker of Mumia, right, that I had on the collage. Well, I found that in her archive, sort of bookmarking a page in Mumia's book, Death Blossoms, right? And also in the archive are a lot of materials, video recordings, paper materials, cassette tapes, right? Of talking about Imam Jamil Al-Amin, who is another political person in the United States, who's been incarcerated for almost 20 years now, right? Due to sort of trumped up charges, right? And a lack of due process in order for him to actually defend himself. And I will now, later on, I'll put a link or something and so people can see that information, what the call to action is now. I also found in Umi's archive that her relationship to this question of political prisoners and prisons in general was even older than I thought. So I mentioned that I had got in contact with her college partner and comrade, Jeff. And so he was telling me that, actually before Jeff, so in the archive, I found this letter from 1973 that was written to her. She was still Audrey at the time. It was from a man named Arthur, who was incarcerated at the Chillicothe Correctional Institute, which is in Chillicothe, Ohio. And that's about a little under an hour away from Ohio State University, where she was a college student. In the letter, he writes, "Harambe to such a beautiful performance." That's what one of the things he said. So one of the things I learned from Jeff, once I read this letter, was that during her time at OSU, she and fellow college dancers would take cars and vans and they would drive to Chillicothe Correctional Institute, which is 49 miles from the college, Mansfield Correctional Facility, which was 65 miles from the college, and a women's prison in Marysville, which was 30 miles from the college, to perform. And they were dance troupes, they were theater groups, they performed and built relationships with those on the inside. And this was a part of a larger program she worked on with Jeff, who said, quote, "Your mother really, she took it upon herself to befriend some guys and correspond with them. It's a great thing to do, keeping people inspired and keeping their faith going while they're incarcerated. Keeping people inspired and keeping their faith going while they're incarcerated is difficult enough. Anything you can do to help lift somebody up above that is good," right? Similarly, Sister Demira, right, when you read about her online, there was this one quote, there were two quotes that I saw. One that said, you know, Demira worked tirelessly for over half a century to free political prisoners. And former political prisoner Sekou Odinga says, quote, she always took it seriously that her comrades from the BPP and the BLA were political prisoners. And she did whatever she could to help us, whether it was sending money, sending a letter of encouragement, or a call or information about what was going on in the streets. She was always looking out for us. And I think this is important because I think, you know, I think in the United States, at least, there's a lot of conversation about abolition right now. And I think there's a lot of momentum, which is great around abolition. And I think these activist sisters and their relationship, right? The relationships they had and they cultivated, right? And their concern and their care for people who are incarcerated, right? I think is really poignant, really powerful, and it's a model for us to think about when we think about, well, what roles can we play as we try to walk this road to abolition, right? What kind of relationships? How can we support political prisoners? How can we support people on the inside generally? Because on some level, they're all political prisoners, right? But I think this is something that I think was an important theme. But the other thing that I realized I didn't mention that I wanted to mention, right? And so I'll do that before moving to the next slide too, was another similarity between Sister Sophia and Sister Amina and the prison. So in that one interview I did, the oral history interview I did with my mother, she tells me her conversion story, right? And her conversion story, and I'm going to summarize what she said, which was lovely. She was a great storyteller. But so she becomes Muslim in March of 1975, right? At a prison, or more specifically at a prison masjid, Sankori Masjid, which was a prison, right? It was that Muslim men, Black Muslim men incarcerated at the Greenhaven Correctional Facility in Stormville, New York, right, had a mosque. And she would go up to the mosque to visit people. I would rather go up to the prison to visit people, and she would, and as a part of doing that, right, she sort of would interact with people who were incarcerated there, men who were Muslim, and the women in their lives, et cetera, et cetera. So she said one day she went up there, and she decided, and she decided this was the day, I'm gonna become Muslim. And the man who gave her her shahada was she said his name was Imam Rasul, AKA Robert 35X, AKA Karate Bob, who she said she later found out was one of Malcolm X's right-hand men. And she was up and she had come to the prison masjid not to convert because they were having a maulid. They were having a celebration of the life of the Prophet. And when I was thinking about that story, I was thinking about how it's kind of this full circle kind of moment, right? Because Malcolm, right, was one of the people, one of the influences that led her to be interested in Islam. She had already been doing work, right, building relationships, being supportive of people who are incarcerated, and then she converts in this place. And scholars say that the year she converted, 75, 76, that prison masjid had the most conversions of any masjid in the country at that time. So then I'm reading Sister Sophia's story, and she's talking about how she converts to Islam. And she's talking about how, she had one of her comrades and mentors, Albert Nuh Washington, also known as Nuh Qayyum, was Muslim. He shared this book with her called Islam, the Misunderstood Religion by Muhammad Qutb, which is also in Umi's library. And that led her to the Quran, and that led her to verses in the second chapter of the Quran, Al-Baqarah, verses 190 to 193, which she highlights some of the key phrases. She says, quote, where Muslims are admonished to, quote, fight in the cause of God, those who fight you, and fight them on until there is no more tumult or oppression, for tumult and oppression is worse than slaughter. So this resonates with her, speaks with her, and what does she do? So 4 years before Umi, in 1971, she takes her shahada at the Sand Quarry Masjid, and the man who gives her shahada is Imam Rasul. Like these are kind of like similarities that both blow my mind, but also I think speak to sort of what it means to be an activist sister. So as I was mentioning, right, I think for all three of these women, their Black radical activism is sort of their gateway to Islam. Sister Sophia is distinct in the sense that, you know, she became Muslim, the earliest one to become Muslim. And so that means she's Muslim as a Panther and not after. And she also is Muslim when she's incarcerated. And she talks about getting criticism from two sides, getting criticism from other people in the movement who saw Islam as sort of incompatible with revolutionary praxis. And then from Muslims who really saw it the same way and said they would only support her if she, quote, denounced the Black liberation movement and her co-defendant who was non-Muslim. In her own words, quote, "I didn't denounce anything or anyone," unquote. Rather, she speaks about, and really powerfully in the collection the world before, she has an essay called "Islam and Revolution is Not a Contradiction." And she speaks really powerfully about her faith as fundamental to her ability to survive, right? She gives this really powerful, like I said, so survive, right? Like I said, because, you know, has this veil condition as being untreated. Her daughter's not with her, and sometimes the state would kind of use her daughter because her daughter was in her mother's custody, but they would sort of try to use that, the idea that she would be taken into the system as a way to torment Sister Sophia, right? She wouldn't get her accommodation as a Muslim. And so she talks about, but in that essay, she gives this really powerful testimony about how she came to know Allah's power, God's omnipotence, omnipresence, and how that knowledge fortified and guided her. And she talks about her escape in 76. And that basically she says, you know, God told me I would escape and that I would return, which is really powerful to read and interesting to read, because I'm like, I don't know what God be telling me, you know, but I think in terms of that, but I say that because of, I think, of the deep spirituality these women had, right? Also in narrating her conversion story, Sister Amina speaks about being attracted to Islam as she circulated in radical Black and Pan-African movement circles because all, quote, the heavy duties, i.e. serious people, were Muslim, unquote. So for Sister Sophia, Sister Demira, and Sister Amina, Islam supported their commitment to Black radical politics, which includes a love for Black people. And like I said, these women are deeply spiritual. They are what we call in Muslim tradition walis, or friends of God. Sophia writes about how she was orientated spiritually and how it connected to her politics. And I want to read this quote because I think it speaks to sort of this theme, this through line, this thread of Islam in the lives of activist sisters and how they operated. So Sister Sophia wrote, quote, "Now I conduct my life on the basis of two things. I follow the dictates of my conscience. I remember Allah in all things. If a thing is at war with my conscience, I don't do it. If it does not fall with the dictates of the Sunnah, and she says Islamic custom, I don't do it. Then I remember the admonishments of Allah. Quote, it is incumbent upon Muslims to wage struggle against tyranny and oppression wherever it may be found, and fight in the way of Allah until tyranny and oppression is no more." How am I doing on time?
You're doing great on time. It's 7:24.
Okay. So, all right. So I'm gonna, I have a little bit more I want to share. So I wanted to also share a little bit about some of the activist sister activities that my mother and her cohort were involved in the mid-1970s. So I want to move here. So as I mentioned, right, actually my mother mentioned, right, a Sister Aliyah Abdul Kareem, Sister Karima Abdul Kareem. And these are two of the first activist sisters she meets as a new Muslim. And they become fast friends and they're mentors to her because they were slightly older than her, both in age, but also in their time as Muslims. In around 1975, they found an organization called MERC, or MIRAC, Muslim Educational Action and Resource Committee. It is one of the first of many organizations that the crew of activist sisters my mother rolled with created. And there were many organizations, right? And actually it reminds me of that famous phrasing, organize, 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 because she and her cohort of activist sisters were consistently organizing. Through organizations that they led, they established, they joined. And for that reason, that in Umi's archive, the materials from that period are primarily documents, event flyers, sign-up sheets, membership rosters, contact sheets, curriculums, event planning notes, independent publications, newsletters, and also books, because the other thing they did back then was study. And so what you see on your screen is one of the, so it's a flyer, an event flyer for an event that they held in 1976 at Columbia University. Now, they held a series of events. They would hold these things they called dawah luncheons or dinners that were smaller affairs in someone's home, or they would have large events like this one. They coordinated it. I asked them about the MSA's involvement and the Muslim Association, and they basically, gave them the space. And I'm fairly certain that the Arabic script on the top of the flyer, where it says Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, in the name of God, the most gracious, the most merciful, is my mother's handwriting. So I did actually get to talk to my mother in that interview about this event, and this is what she had to say. Quote, "We, MERC, had a brother from South Africa, Ismail Abdul Razak, which to this day we wonder what happened to him. He was over here given dawah by the MSA, and we were able to befriend him. And we had a big program at Columbia University. All these people came, and Ismail was very, very charismatic. Like people talk about Ahmed Deedat, he sort of preceded Ahmed Deedat. He was living in exile from South Africa, living in Egypt, and somewhere in there he disappeared. We had him speak with Bed-Stuy Brooklyn community activist Al Van. We had a meeting there, and those Afrocentric brothers who were not Muslim were impressed by Brother Ismail because he could speak in a language they could understand, show how Islam could enhance a community, improve a community, and still respect the people's culture and race. Because there was still the issue of racism among Muslims." So I talked to Sister Karima about this, and she agreed. He was in the country, and she said the brother of Ismail, and they sort of kidnapped him, right? Basically, they took advantage of the opportunity of his visit to bring him to their audience, into their organizing and the relationships that they had that were transnational and Pan-African. Because the MSA then and now is known for its anti-Black attitudes. So they would not have brought this speaker, despite the fact that he was coming from apartheid South Africa, to the broader Black community. But the activist sisters did, right? And their interest in this speaker from South Africa is indicative of the way they saw their own location through what was called at the time a kind of third world consciousness, thereby relating themselves to movement, struggles, and women, both on the continent of Africa and in Muslim communities and others across the globe. And so there's something else in the archive. There's this magazine that I found from 1980 called Sahabiyat, which means female companions. Sister Leah was on the staff of that magazine. And the first issue of that magazine, the cover is of a woman from Iran in a chador and like a Kalashnikov, right? From the Iranian Revolution. And inside is an article about Fatima Barnawi, an Afro-Palestinian activist, right? And so they saw themselves in both Pan-African and transnational and third world ways. The other thing that I want to mention regard to Mirak, which is a little bit, could seem as a departure, but really is in line with activist sisters and their sort of politics and thinking. Whenever I talk to Sister Karima about their work as activist sisters in that period, she always mentions the Muslim Women's Fashion Show tradition that they helped create, even inaugurate. And these women, so I have a couple of them on the screen, right? So Mama Rakia, Sister Aliyah, Sister Karima, as well as the Sister Lubna, who's not pictured here. I consider them architects, innovators, and icons of Muslim women's fashion in the US. And I give them these titles in recognition of the fact that the work they did was groundbreaking, right? Mama Rakia, she started hosting these African-centered or Afrocentric shows in the 60s, which inspired the shows that Sister Aliyah and Sister Karima coordinated in the 70s, and the long fashion career of Sister Lubna. And this recognition is important because in the mainstream US media landscape, you know, it's like every year they discover a gasp, you know, it's like Muslim women like to coordinate their scarf and their shirt, you know, something like that, right? And when they make this discovery, the Muslim women in question are never Black, right? Yet, and so there's this kind of fashion tradition that they started that has a significance, but also these shows, when they talk about them, the shows were sort of a form of pedagogy, right? Because one of the things about being an activist sister, one of the things about Black sort of revolution in the US was really motivated by this idea that we also have to be new people, right? So we have had our history hidden from us, we've been lied to, we have to sort of learn about who we are again and become those people, right? And so part of what they would do, and so Sister Karima described in the fashion show, she said, you know, she would go down to the subway and she would record subway signs, right? Subway sounds rather. And then for the show, they would have these like skits or scenes. So people are getting off at train stops on 125th Street, 110th Street. I'm going to college, I'm going to work, I'm going wherever, right? Teaching how Muslim women, teaching these Muslim women how they could be Muslim women and dress in the ways that they felt were appropriate for Muslim women, right? How this kind of self-fashioning, right? Because they said that, you know, all of them would say that as Black women who come from a tradition of looking good, right? You know, when you became Muslim, you had to figure out how to sort of cover in different ways, you'd be at the mercy of whatever's on the rack, right? And this tradition, this Black tradition of looking good was hard to sort of do that and be modest at the same time, right? And so some women would look and they would say kind of frumpy or dumpy, and Mama Rakia told me, she would tell them, this is not Islam, right? And so the fashion wasn't just about like modeling fashions, but also Sister Lubna says it's about being models for other women, right? She said women would come to the show and say, oh, okay, I can do it like this, I can do it like that, right? And of course, the fashion shows had modeling, but they also had other activities. Like Sister Karima talks about, there was a workshop on childbirth, for example, right? And of course, these fashion shows were one part of the constellation of activism of activist sisters. My last slide. Okay. So legacies, lessons and legacies. So I initially left this slide completely blank because I was thinking to myself, there are so many lessons, right? There's such a rich legacy. I don't really know where to begin. And I ended up on this word care, and I'll come back to that. But I want to make maybe 2 points. So when I was asked to pull this teaching together, I was asked for sort of a course description. And so there were some questions in that course description that I want to return to. So one question is, what is their place, the activist sisters, in the long durée of the Black radical tradition? So this term, the Black radical tradition, right? We usually, a lot of people get it from the author Cedric Robinson and his book, Black Marxism. And when Robinson, when he's looking for the Black radical tradition, right? He's not making it up. He's basically trying to make what he sees as a collective consciousness or collective struggle. He's trying to make it coherent, right? And when he talks about the nature of the Black radical tradition, and he talks about examples of it, he talks about the stories of Boukman and Macandel of Haiti. He talks about Nanny of Jamaica. He talks about Turner of Virginia. And he says they lived on their own terms, died on their own terms, and obtained their freedom on their own terms. And they did so because of their metaphysics, cosmology, faith, right? A knowledge of self, right? That rebelled and resisted and imagined a way beyond that of the oppressors. And this is where I see the activist sisters in that tradition, right? I see them in the way they move in the world with really no fear, right, of anything other than God, which made them formidable, but it also made them deeply, deeply caring. I'm going to quote Sister Sophia again, because when reflecting on her life, she said, quote, "I have come to realize that picking up the gun was/is the easy part. The difficult part is the day-to-day organizing, educating, showing people by example what needs to be done to create a new society. The hard and painstaking work of changing ourselves into new beings, of loving ourselves and our people, and working with them daily to create a new reality. This is the first revolution, the internal revolution," unquote. Another question I had was, what do the trajectories teach or challenge in respect to contemporary definitions and debates on Black feminism and activism? And so, building on her quote, I want to start with the activism, because the thing about activist sisters is that their activism is not flashy, right? And it's like, you know, we have this big man approach to history often, right? And so only the people who, like, I don't know, led 1 million people down the street is the history that matters, although the only way that person was able to lead 1 million people down the street is because there were like 50 people doing all the work, right? But that work doesn't really get you written about. And really learning about these activist sisters and this painstaking daily work of changing ourselves into new beings really made me have to reevaluate, right? Or made me understand that I was walking around actually with a limited sense of what revolutionary work is and what a revolution, fundamental social change for equity and justice, requires. I think it's also really important to underscore, and I think, and this might be also for the Muslims who are going to watch this in particular, that Sister Sophia's emphasis, Sister Damira's emphasis, Sister Amina's emphasis on this painstaking daily work is not political quietism, meaning there's not a call for being politically neutral or socially isolated, which is how some people, and Muslims in particular, I should say, in the US, I have seen act out this idea of jihad of the nafs, which is how I understand her using the term the internal revolution. And I know that they are not talking about being politically neutral or socially isolated, because that's not how they live their lives, right? And all the unacknowledged labor that they did to make struggle possible, make struggles move forward, and critically prepare us on how to be in the new worlds we're fighting for. And the last thing I'll just make a point about is this question of feminism. So it's interesting, because this is the School for Black Feminist Politics, right? Which I think is a completely appropriate place to have this conversation. But while activist sisters organize and mobilize as women in ways similar to their Black feminist peers of the period, they did not necessarily see themselves as feminists, right? Both from my reading of the archive, and I even called Sister Karima because I was like, am I reading this right? You know, they shared the Black feminist concern with Black women's lives and their futures and their presence. You know, my mother was always an advocate for women. Like, one of her things that she did was, like, you know, help found a Muslim woman's, you know, sort of homeless shelter. But particularly in the 70s, right, which I think is part of the history of Black feminism, right? They still sort of saw feminism as kind of like a white woman's bag, you know, not really reflecting the needs and concerns of Black women, which were really, really tied to the needs and concerns of the Black community. And for some too, they still had hope in what Eula Taylor calls the promises of patriarchy, right? That said, also in Umi's archive is a first edition autographed copy of Angela Davis's Woman, Race, and Class. And so I say that to say that I guess two things, and I'll end on this, and this question of care, right? I was talking to Mariam Kashani, who I mentioned, who wrote about Sister Damira, just about my thoughts on this. And she said something I found really powerful. She said, those who believe in freedom live in the contradictions, right? And that's important, because when you care, right, about your people, when you care about Black people, there are going to be contradictions. There are going to be places and things where you don't see eye to eye, where you don't necessarily connect, where there might be dissonance, where there's going to be disagreement, right? But because you care about people, right, you live with these contradictions, right? Because ultimately, what you're interested in is not necessarily getting them to, is not really about getting them to believe what you believe as much as it's about, you know, getting everybody free, if that makes sense, right? And I think that comes out of a space of caring, a really deep space of love, you know, love for self, love for others, love for God. Like, I think that care is really central to sort of what the tradition of the activist sisters. So I'll stop there.
Wow. I knew this was going to be great. The audience, y'all, I just want to say this. I don't want to sound weird, but I've been wanting to invite Dr. Suad for the longest time. And we were actually supposed to have this teach-in last year, but things happened. And just for Dr. Suad to be the first teach-in of 2023, I just want to say thank you so much. I mean, you look at the comments, amazing. Thank you so much. You had a tons of questions. And like, you know, folks are already saying like, you know, they're doing similar research or like, you know, the research aligns. I think someone said, I'm very thankful and grateful for this presentation. And yeah, thank you for Ready for Revolution. Absolutely wonderful. And she needs to come back real soon. Dr. Swan, another teaching. And so we are at the moment or time of the teaching where y'all get to ask questions. I just want to say that, and I'm going to give Dr. Suad some time to like, you know, chill and sit here after speaking for so long, that we may not be able to get through all the questions, but please don't feel slighted. I'm going to read some of the questions that pertain to really what Dr. Suad was speaking about, but please don't feel slighted if we don't get to your question. And also for folks, I'm going to try to sift through the chat, but if you have a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to ask questions. And once again, this teach-in will be available on Black Women Radical's YouTube, as well as with the reading lists that Dr. Suad will provide, right? And we'll share that on Black Women Radical's social media and newsletter. So I just want to read a few comments to, you know, get you a little, you know, rest up for speaking a while. But Sister Suwada was dope and inspiring. This was beautiful. Thank you. Excellent. May Allah reward you for this effort in archiving this important history for us to grow from. And so the first question, and I'm going to share the questions in the chat as well. So Salam Suad, so grateful to be here and continue to learn from you. As someone who also enjoys creative and historical research, what are some best practice tips you recommend for sharing long form research to new audiences?
When people say long form, what do they mean? Do you know?
No, there's no specificity or a specifics
Okay.
on long form.
So, all right. So I think that's so funny. I don't know if I have best practice tips. I feel like I'm definitely in the kind of like building as I go kind of way with all of this. But I think that, how do I want to respond? Let me see. So I guess like long oral histories, long articles. Like, okay. All right. So I think what I've done, I guess I'll just speak about what I've done, right? So partially, one of the ways that I do that is by, you know, sort of selecting a representative clip, right, of something, sharing that, and then allowing people to link back to something else that's longer, right? Because it is the kind of thing where people may or may not, you know, sort of, you know, if you just kind of give a 15-minute interview, like, hey, this happened, you know, people need support, right? To kind of sort of know what to listen to or why this is significant. It may take a minute. So one way that I've done that. So for example, with Umi's Archive, with the website. So umisarchive.com is my website. For the archive, right now you only see kind of snippets of what I did. Hopefully within the next couple of months, the full exhibition series will be back up online. But part of what I would do is sort of like have, like for example, in 1998, Dr. Amina Wadud gave a talk on the Hajar paradigm. And this is historic because it was one of the first times that she talked about this paradigm that's been central to her work ever since. And so there was a cassette tape recording in Umi's archive of that talk, like the actual talk and the Q&A. And so what I did for the exhibition was I sort of took some snippets of the archive, right? And I did different, so one thing I did, for example, was I took a section of the talk and juxtaposed it with this, because it was about marriage and this idea of divorce. And then I juxtaposed it to this VHS clip of like this episode of Oprah that was talking about like the divorce crisis, right? So a really short kind of like 2-3 minute thing. And then it's like, and then if you want to hear the whole tape, or if you want to read the transcript, you can go here. So that's one way that I've found to kind of deal with that question of long, right? And then also I think is also the question of like, I think in terms of text and that kind of thing, I think it's just thinking about where you want, who's your reader, right? And what you want to share and what they need to know, if that makes sense. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you so much. Someone said, Sister Sawad, you are brilliant and so appreciated. And then someone asked, thank you so much for this talk. I'm just curious whether there's anything more you'd like to say about who these women were as people, their personalities, style. We get a lovely glimpse of this from the photos and their personal relationships, etc.
As people, thank you. I appreciate that question. I wish I could ask the person more about it, because one of the things, like, I find myself in biography now, which is not something that I ever thought I'd really be doing. And so you're always wondering about how much detail is too much detail, or what to say or not to say. But like I said, I didn't know Sister Safiya Bukhari personally, but from reading about her, right, I think let me talk about maybe like motherhood a little bit with them. Maybe that's a good thing. So, she was one of those people in her own description who was really committed to the struggle, right? And as a result, she did not, and then when she was incarcerated, when she was underground as well, was unable to sort of parent her daughter. And when she did get out of prison and return to home, her and her daughter had a lot of healing they had to do. And then her daughter actually does like the foreword to the book, or the preface to the book, the collection, or before, and she talks about like being angry with her mother, and then coming to healing with her mother and understanding the choices her mother made and respecting that, right? And when you look at like video clips of Sister Safiya, or you see her writing, like she is about it. She's fiery, she's strong, she's powerful, right? She's working tirelessly, right? And so in terms of her personality, you can feel that. And people say, like, they say anyone, I think it's in the also somewhere before, someone's like, it was either Angela Davis or the woman who did the introduction, is like, she worked harder than anybody else. Like, this is something about her personality. In terms of, and I'll say maybe something about my mother, so it's interesting because I think about my mother versus Sister Safiya, because my mother did parent me, right? She was a single parent for me and my sister, but she was still super active. And like, it was funny because, I would just be everywhere with her. So that was the thing, it was like, where she's going here, I'm right there, type of thing. And she was very, other thing about her personality, I guess, and she was like the life of the party kind of person. This is before Islam and in Islam, right? And people will say stuff like, and I think I saw one of my cousins on here, the party didn't start, so Amina Haq showed up, right? And when you talk to her friends from high school and college, it's the same thing. The party didn't start till Archie was here. And so I think she had a lot of vibrancy in her personality. And then Sister Demira, like I said, I didn't know her super well. For me, Sister Demira, I remember her as, she was calm. That's what I remember, right? And not calm and like quiet at all, but just steady, I guess maybe is what I'm gonna say, and like peaceful and really like welcoming as a person, is what I remember from her. And I think it's also interesting thinking about, and I think she ended up, and of the 3 women, actually of the 4 women really, but 3 main women, Sister Zamira she was married like for 40 years or something like that, and she has 4 kids, and they talk about, in Mariam Kashani talks about a lot about how important it was for her, and not that it wasn't important for everyone else, but I'm just talking about her in general, like how, sort of establishing a particular kind of family life was also really important to her, and an extension, right, of her Black radical sort of politics.
Thank you. Thank you. Someone said, yes, love this point about being mothers and bringing their children along with them. And then someone else commented, being at those fashion shows, you got to see how these women had fun, and boy, was a sight to see. So there is another question. And so we're going to only take probably like a few more questions, y'all. So please do not, hurt the messenger. Okay. I'm just going to put that out there. So, someone asked Asa Sister, if you wouldn't mind, could you elaborate on your approach to conducting oral history interviews? Any useful techniques/strategies? During my graduate program at Teachers College, Columbia University, I conducted a few oral history interviews via Zoom, and I'm wondering how that will translate via film and in person when, inshallah, I'm accepted into a PhD program.
Okay. So Jamie, ASA is short for Assalamu Alaikum, just FYI.
Okay. I thank you so much. I just wanted to make listen, thank you.
Yeah, so I think so the first approach I have to that is just, finding out what people do, what best practices are. So, one of the things that I know of best practices is to kind of talk to people and then interview them, right? So kind of the idea of kind of getting people warmed up, right? Kind of just having a conversation, talking about some of the things you want to talk about, making notes so that when you come back for the actual sort of like interview, they're able to kind of tell the stories and they're comfortable, right? They're relaxed, and there's some rapport, right? Because I mean, it's a lot to share. I mean, you're asking somebody to share their life with you, right? Which is a really, sort of important thing. And so I think that's one practice that I learned. Actually, my one of my comrades, Zahir Ali, he's an oral historian, and so I always talk to him about things I wanted to do like that. Obviously, getting permission is also a key best practice, as well as I did some. So I had to do, because of COVID. So like I had interviewed Sister Kareem on Zoom, one of my mother's college friends on Zoom, Jeff on Zoom, right? And so, I think the Zoom interviews for me, I decided not to I was not going to use the visual of the Zoom interviews. If I ever was going to use, like the audio and the text of it for public, so just, I don't know, just because to me, visually, they didn't look good. I didn't do that. But I think if you have a good Zoom like visual, that works as well. But really the other thing too is I would also record. I also had so I would record the audio, from the Zoom, but also I would have my phone or recorder on the table as well to capture audio, because audio, you don't want to miss anything. So maybe that's another sort of practice that I also have done for that. And then also, making sure people, then also returning to people when you need to, right? And be like, oh, I wanted to ask you about something, I want to clarify something, because you don't want to sort of relay people's information incorrectly.
Yes, these are some great tips for myself as well. So I'm looking in here in the chat because a few folks had questions here. Someone asked, and we're going to take about like 2 more questions, y'all, okay? Someone asked, I love the biographical take you have here. Are you able to speak micro level on the impacts Muslim women, macro, it says macro level at the bottom, macro level on the impacts Muslim women have had on the movement and the flavor that added?
Huh. I mean, I guess the way that I would think about that is there is no movement without them, right? And so that's the macro impact. In terms of just just generally speaking, and it's not, and I don't know if I want to say that this is that, no, I know this is not specific to Muslim women, but the idea is that like there's all this, I think, and I'm quoting Angela Davis said this in talking about Sister Sophia, there's all this unacknowledged labor that goes into making movements, right? And I think that is, and we don't, it's unacknowledged, but it's there. And so for me, when I think about their impact, I think about the sort of that everyday work of, feeding people, clothing people, educating children. One of the things I didn't talk about, also in Umi's archive it was this folder with the full curriculum of this Islamic school that they were starting in 1978, and it's full of documents and literally curriculum, parent sign-up sheets, the history of how it started, fundraising, all this kind of stuff, right? So feeding people, educating people, clothing people, building people, right? I mean, I guess I'm an impact, right? This idea that there are people walking around who are whole, relatively speaking, and able to sort of continue to contribute and continue to move us forward. I mean, I think that is one macro impact. In terms of flavor, I will say, when I was thinking about that thing about feminism and their either rejection or ambivalence about it, one of the things I think that I found really interesting is that in the 70s, at least, and in some of the ways they would talk, there was this kind of women should, be good mothers, right? Good wives, and also community leaders. It was always that, right? It was also this kind of thing, so I feel there's a particular kind of agency and belief in your agency, and also belief in your ability to do whatever you need to do and how you want to do it, for Muslim women in particular. But I also think it extends to Muslims of other sort of gender identities and that kind of thing too, that really does come from these Black Muslim women, right? And maybe even more specifically in the Muslim community, right? But they gave, and they continue to give, a lot of people permission to sort of live Islam the way that they see fit. And I think they made a space for that. So I'll say that.
Well, the last question, I mean, several people have asked this question in the comments. They're like, is there a book gonna come out? Several people have asked this, and I think that's, a great way to, end the teaching regarding the Q&A. This archive of these activist sisters' leadership is just so needed, and so powerful in this lineage and legacy. So is there going to be a book?
Yes, yes, there is. I am actually in the process of determining not so much what is going. Yeah, well, I know. I mean, I'm drafting something now, and but I think it's gonna be, well, I guess my goal, what I want, I guess I'm being because partially I want to write something that doesn't take me 50 years to write, you know what I mean? Just to kind of share the information in a way that's meaningful and compelling and accessible, right? Because I think for something like this, I'm really interested in it, at least at first, right? Being connected to, being available to the communities that are most directly connected to these women, and also for it to be beautiful and beautiful and affordable at the same time. So I'm trying to figure out all those kind of things, but a number of the things I talked about today are going to be a part of this book that I'm working on. So, send all your prayers and good energy that I can work quickly and, get something, out in the world.
I cannot wait for my autograph, signed copy. And then someone in the comments was like, I can put my order in now. Well, I just want to say, and this is what I typically do before we close off, I like to give, our featured guests their flowers. I just want to thank you for your work, your leadership, I've been fangirling over you for a long time. It is such an honor to, you know, have you lead the first teach-in for the School for Black Feminist Politics. And I know that so many folks in the audience feel the same way. I feel enriched. I feel like there's, you know, like you talked about the archives, like you have to, you know, things are missing. There's revisionist histories. And I think that you have really amplified an important history that everyone needs to know about. And so thank you, Dr. Sawad. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you. No, thank you so much. Like I said, thank you again for the invitation, for the opportunity. Thanks everyone for their comments. And I want to invite anyone to like, my email is drsawad@umich.edu. That's my work email. If you have particular, any kind of feedback, I'm really, like I said, because I'm writing something so I feel like any sort of constructive feedback folks have, or for me, I totally appreciate and welcome that. So.
Yes, and I just dropped, I hope that's
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So feel free to reach out. Y'all better reach out. I'm telling you, like you are connected to gold over here, gem over here. So just want to reiterate that this teaching will be available on Black Men Radical's YouTube. I shared links to Dr. Sawad's archive, Umi's archive, her website. And please be on the lookout for the teaching on YouTube and also a reading list. So just once again, thank you so much. And God bless everyone. And thank you for being here.
Thank you. Do I just leave?
Yes, you can.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.